So I'm going to start this video off with a little story. Back while I was in game design school in 2019, a common discussion point in several classes was the topic of the fabled favorite game of all time. Now, any longtime viewer of mine can testify that I've been rather indecisive on this matter over the years, with the holder of the favorite game title having changed quite a bit. But it was during my time in game design school, following all these discussions, that I really started to think about it a bit more. See, in the past, I would determine my favorite game solely off which game I found the most fun, with its other elements serving as contributors. Now, it's not necessarily an invalid way of determining your favorite per se, but it was likely why I was so indecisive. For me at least, it was too flimsy and easily bendable of a reason to pick a favorite. So, I dug a bit deeper, and the moment that I did, determining my actual favorite game of all time was almost instant, and I've yet to doubt that at any point since then. So for once in my life, I can actually make that statement with confidence. With that said, let's talk about Dust and Elysian Tale. I'm sure many of you longtime viewers are familiar with this game, given how much I had talked about it before my rebranding. But to those who aren't familiar with it, Dust and Elysian Tale is an indie game that came out back in 2012 on the Xbox 360's Live Arcade, before eventually making its way to Steam, the PS4, and the Nintendo Switch over the course of the following years. The game was developed by Dean Dodgerill, an illustrator and animator whose only game development experience beforehand had been contract work back in the 90s. In fact, at the time, he was actually working on his own animated film, set in the same world that Dust would end up taking place in. But when the opportunity arose, Dean Dodgerill decided to give game development a try, initially intending on making something smaller scale, and presuming it'd only take about 3 months. In reality, Dust ended up taking him nearly 4 years to make. Now, you may have picked up on this based on how I've been describing this all, but the most notable thing about Dust's development is that Dean Dodgerill was the game's sole developer. Granted, he did get some assistance in other factors. He outsourced the music and sound design, had a friend of his assist with the writing, hired a voice director to cast and direct the game's voice actors, and received help with initial publishing from Microsoft themselves. But the art, the design, the programming, all of that was solely Dodgerill's doing, which, for someone who started the project as just an artist, is incredibly impressive. As for my history with the game, I first heard of this game back in 2014, when a friend of mine introduced it to me on Steam. Almost immediately, its visuals completely captivated me. And sure enough, during that year's Steam winter sale, that same friend gifted it to me. And even back then, I absolutely loved it, and was quick to include it among my top favorite games. Since then, I've bought the game myself on 3 separate occasions. I have the PS4 version, the Switch version, and even the physical PC version courtesy of IndieBox when it was still around. Either way, it's been a while since I've last talked about Dust. Heck, I haven't talked about it at all since my rebranding. So today, I felt like changing that. Though before we begin, I do want to note a few things. 1, I still have been dealing with a few issues with my capture card, so you may occasionally see the footage hiccup a bit here and there. Not much I could do about that, so I apologize in advance. 2, this is not a spoiler-free review, though I'll be sure to mark spoiler territory as we go along. And finally, the footage I recorded was of the PS4 version played on a PS5, but I can confirm that there's no PS5 exclusive changes or upgrades. And if you'd rather play the game on another platform, I can confirm that the game works just as well on both PC and Switch. Now with that said, let's get started. The game's story focuses on Dust, a skilled swordsman who just so happens to suffer from an ever-so-classic storytelling trope, amnesia. On his journey, he's accompanied by 2 companions, the ancient sentient sword, the Blade of Ara, and a nimbat named Fidget, who had been Ara's guardian before he was awoken and flew off to find his fated wielder, that being Dust, prompting Fidget to follow. She initially tags along with the intent of taking Ara back to her clan after Dust's identity crisis is solved, but yeah, she doesn't take him back. Now at first, the goal of their journey is to find out more about Dust's forgotten past, but after agreeing to help a village out with their monster problem, things take a turn for them very quickly. As requested by the village mayor, Dust, Ara, and Fidget go after the leader of the monsters, an armored pyromancer named Fuse, who they find in a village he recently destroyed. But upon slaying him, he reveals in his dying moments that he was part of a race of reptilian people known as Moonbloods, who are currently being hunted down and slaughtered by a tyrant known as General Gaius. But on top of that, Fuse reveals that Dust was an assassin hired by Gaius to assist in his campaign. Like I said, things take a turn very quickly. Once back in the village, Dust speaks with a townsperson named Ginger for more information on the Moonbloods, and she reveals that she's the last of a group of Moonblood sympathizers that were killed by Gaius' soldiers, with Dust supposedly being among those who committed the act. And from there, the goal shifts. While yes, Dust is still personally desiring to recover his memories, he, Ara, and Fidget are now out to do what they can to stop Gaius before he can successfully wipe out the Moonbloods. And while yes, their journey takes them off the beaten path a few times, each conflict they resolve ends up tying back to General Gaius. For instance, it's revealed that the waters of both the surface and the underground regions have been drying up, prompting underground monsters to emerge to the surface. Dust goes to investigate and discovers that the celestial being that controls the waters, Lady Tethys, did so intentionally to stop Gaius' murderous campaign. Or later on, a magic barrier blocks Dust's way of progression, caused by a demonic spirit that sought to trap him. Upon helping the elderly Cora calm the demonic spirit, it's revealed to be Cora's deceased husband, Baron Cain, who had made his fortune from providing Gaius vital information for his campaign, including the whereabouts of the Moonblood sympathizers. His regret from inadvertently enabling countless deaths was what transformed him into that demonic form upon his own passing. And on top of that, each encounter adds an additional piece to the puzzle that is Dust's past, with Baron Cain in particular dropping a rather interesting revelation.
You did not know? You possess a rare gift. Two souls joined as one. Never have I seen it before.
Eventually, the trio makes their way up through the mountains, finding the remnants of the Moonblood sympathizers' village, and Dust begins regaining memories upon seeing the area. Though not memories of one of Gaius' men. He remembers the village as if he were a resident of it himself. And once they go into a house and come across Ginger and a Moonblood elder, the truth emerges. Like Baron Cain implied, Dust was actually born from two souls, those of Jin, Ginger's brother, and Cassius, one of Gaius' assassins. The two of them had killed each other simultaneously during Cassius' attack on the Moonblood sympathizers, and with their souls entwined in death, the Moonbloods were able to use these souls, combining Jin's good-hearted nature with Cassius' skills as a swordsman, to create the Senmith Rarin, that is, Dust. It's a pretty intense revelation to say the least, so much so that the game actually crashed partway through this scene. I have absolutely no idea why it crashed here, but it honestly got a good laugh out of me. Regardless, with this knowledge of his true purpose, Dust meets with the remaining Moonbloods in their volcanic base and helps them prepare for battle against Gaius and his army. And once it's become apparent that Gaius knows where their base is, Dust and the Moonbloods charge into battle, slashing down soldiers and airships until finally getting to Gaius himself. While Gaius, convinced that Dust is still Cassius, tries to get him back on his side, briefly putting Dust's resolve into question. With encouragement from Fidget and Ara, Dust stands his ground and clashes with Gaius. And at long last, Dust is able to strike the general down. Seriously wounded by the explosion, Dust crawls towards General Gaius, who's hanging on for dear life. Accepting now that Cassius is truly gone, Gaius throws himself off the edge. Fidget tries to get Dust to escape with her, but he's accepted that his time has come, willingly letting the lava consume him. However, as the Moonblood Elder gives a speech commemorating Dust's sacrifice and how the Moonbloods can finally rebuild their civilization, Fidget and Ginger witness a dust cloud, along with Ara, emerge and fly off, suggesting that Dust may still be alive. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. While a bit by the numbers at points, I do quite like what's done with the story in this game. In particular, I really like the direction they went with who Dust really was. Having the reveal of Dust supposedly being Cassius happen as early as it does helps a lot. It makes you think you know exactly what direction this twist is going, but then the game starts planting little hints that it's not as straightforward as it seemed. And speaking personally, the first time I played this game, the twist that Dust was both Jin and Cassius completely caught me off guard. Though actually on that note, I do want to get to talking about the characters, because they're a large part of what makes the story so effective. Starting with the titular character himself, Dust is a pretty solid main protagonist. He's pretty reserved and somewhat shy, often coming off as socially awkward when speaking with townsfolk, but he has a good heart and is more than willing to do what's right and bring justice, even if he has to get his hands dirty to do so. Now in the past, I did feel like his Cassius side was a bit underplayed personality-wise, especially since Dust himself talks about the internal struggle he occasionally has between Jin and Cassius. But upon this playthrough, I realized that it wasn't necessarily Cassius' cruelty that he inherited, but rather his aggression. Especially in moments where Dust feels helpless, he tends to get agitated and snappy in the way he talks to others.
Why is it that every time I make a decision, you treat it like some kind of test? What haven't you told me, Ara?
This is not the time nor the place.
And just what is the perfect time and place? How many more have to die before you tell me who I am? Who am I, Ara? What am I even doing here?
But yeah, at the core of it all, Dust is a good-hearted, well-meaning hero, definitely inheriting that well from Jin. And on top of that, he's also got a bit of a sassy sense of humor, particularly towards Fidget.
You mean Fidget can't talk now? At all? That's terrible. Really awful. Not sure how I'll get by.
Speaking of which, Fidget serves as the game's comic relief, but quite fortunately, not the annoying type. Now I will admit, some of Fidget's jokes don't quite click with me, particularly when she just kinda starts rambling, but she does have some genuinely funny moments.
See? You can use this to measure your doll. It's perfect.
No, it really isn't. Actually, that's the worst drawing I've ever seen.
Just shut up and make this stupid doll.
Above all else though, Fidget's just kind of a mischievous but precious bean. Protect her at all costs. Aura is essentially the mentor of the three, providing sagely advice for Dust and Fidget throughout the journey, and doing the whole when the time comes kinda deal. But amusingly, even he has his limits. There's one scene in particular that comes to mind. While they're in the mountains, Dust and Fidget are discussing setting off an avalanche to help clear a path for them, and Aura just straight up calls out how stupid their plan is.
Really? Do I need to be the voice of caution here? Need I explain how creating an avalanche puts us all in danger?
Actually, on a quick side note, I do really like this game's wit with its sense of humor, making for a nice balance to the darker tone of the overall story, while still knowing when it's appropriate to be joking around.
Oh my. You really should have saved first.
How'd they jump my fence? Crafty vermin, those surface dwellers.
She does see that I can fly, right?
I'll be sure to tell her, Fidget. I'm sure that'll clear things right up. Maybe a little more cotton up there in the head area? I don't think you're accurately capturing the pure size of Fidget's head.
My head is just fine. You're the ones wearing those stupid hats. Maybe you two could form a stupid hat club.
As for the supporting cast, many of the NPCs are a bit simplistic personality-wise, but even then, quite a few of them are quite memorable and likable. Ginger's one of the standout ones, of course, going through a mini arc of her own as she opens up to Dust despite his ties to her family's death, especially after realizing that her brother is a part of him. The conversation she has with Dust at the Moonblood camp in particular is a highlight for her character. Beyond her though, there are a few other standout characters. There's Bopo, this underground dwelling child who helps Dust seek out Lady Tethys, also his story is utterly soul-crushing. The Moonblood merchant Seraph, who appears throughout the game to supply Dust with equipment and occasional advice, and before anyone makes a Resident Evil 4 joke, the game already beat you to that punch.
As for your reward, I will pay you a bonus for the first new material you sell me.
Ah, he'll buy them at the high price.
Well, yes. Yes, I will.
And the blacksmith Haley, who's able to craft equipment from any blueprints Dust finds. She also may or may not have a thing for Dust. Okay, no, she definitely has a thing for Dust. Personally, I can get behind this, if only because their ship name would be Daily, and then I could say that I'm shipping it daily. That joke was way funnier in my head, I promise. Now on that note, I do want to address the elephant in the room in regards to characters, that being the game's main antagonist, General Gaius. For a grand majority of the game, characters will tell Dust about how cruel Gaius is, and how he'll stop at nothing to rid the world of the Moonbloods, even if that includes killing his own kind. But on the flip side, we only ever see him a handful of times in the game. In between chapters, we witness conversations between him and one of his commanders, usually on the matter of Cassius, and these scenes communicate both Gaius' distaste for Moonbloods and his concern for Cassius' well-being. In fact, he tends to come off as rather melancholy, if anything. And Dust doesn't even come face to face with him until the very end of the game. But that said, even though Gaius is very much a tell-don't-show antagonist, I think it kind of works in this instance. And it ties back to what I've been saying earlier about each core conflict being connected to his campaign. We may not see what he himself has been doing for much of the game, but we see the effect of his actions. Few survive an attack from his army, but his desire for revenge, combined with the effect of his life support armor, drove him to become the destructive madman that he is in the game. Lady Tethys' rage at seeing how her waters were benefiting Gaius' soldiers made her blindly cut off the waters, ignoring the innocent lives she was putting at stake. In fact, Bopo's father outright dies from illness because of their healing wells having been dried up for so long. And Baron Kane's assistance in Gaius' campaign led to distrust among his family and servants, so much so that when he died, his estate ended up abandoned and desolate, with his own spirit becoming a wrathful demonic one, as I said before. Now yes, this doesn't do much for Gaius as a character, but in regard to setting him up as a threat that needs to be stopped, it actually helps quite a lot. Finally, I think what also helps all the characters in standing out is the voice cast. The voice acting in this game as a whole is top-notch, with each actor giving their A-game with their performances. Which on that note, you'd be surprised just how many currently big-name voice actors had this game as one of their earliest roles. We've got actors like Lucian Dodge, Edward Bosco, Al Monte, Erica Mendez, Justin Briner, Kira Buckland, Sean Chiplock, and Xander Mobus, to name just a few. Though I suppose that's enough about the story and characters for the time being. It's all quite solid, but it's only one portion of why I love this game so much. So let's get talking about the video gamey stuff it does. So at its core, Dust and Elysian Tale is a 2D action platformer, mixing in elements of hack and slashes, action RPGs, and Metroidvanias. In other words, you're going to be spending a majority of the game jumping around and beating up enemies with your magic talking sword. At the start of the game, you don't have a lot to work with moveset wise. Aside from movement, Dust is only able to jump and do standard melee attacks, which can be mixed together into various combos by inputting different patterns with the square and triangle buttons. But as the game progresses, you unlock more abilities both for level traversal and for combat. Just in the first area alone, you unlock the ability to dash both on the ground and in midair, a powerful sword spin attack known as the Dust Storm, which can also be done both on the ground and midair, and you get taught about both Fidget's magic capabilities and of parrying. And further down the line, you unlock more spells for Fidget to use, the ability to slide, which works both to get through tight spaces and as an attack, the ability to climb specifically marked walls, and a double jump, which, with an additional upgrade, allows you to catapult yourself upwards in gusts of wind. Dust himself feels absolutely amazing to control, with the perfect amount of responsiveness in inputs and weight in his movement. At no point did I ever feel like he wasn't doing something I wanted him to do. And then there's the matter of combat. Yes, one could argue that it's a bit on the simplistic side, and maybe even a bit button mashy, and I wouldn't outright disagree with those notions, but even with that in mind, I love this game's combat. Between the particle effects and the sound design and the perfect amount of weight to each slash, the combat is endlessly fun to partake in, and in most cases, I would actively seek out fights even if I didn't need to. The simplicity actually works in its favor too, as it makes it easy to pick up and understand, while still having some additional depth to make the process of mastering it satisfying. For instance, there's how the previously mentioned magic system works. On its own, Fidget's spells do little to nothing, but when combined with the Dust Storm, the effects of her magic can be absolutely devastating. And as I said earlier, you unlock more spells for her as the game goes on, with each one becoming more powerful and satisfying to use, with the last one, the electricity spell, being particularly fun to play around with. That said, you do still need to be wise with how you use your magic, for it's locked to a power meter, and if it runs out, you won't be able to use magic until it fills back up. But on top of that, your dash is tied to your power meter, which is one of their best means of maneuvering, so you do need to balance your use of dashing and magic. Same goes with the Dust Storm. As powerful as it is, it's not limitless, and if overused without a chance to cool down, Dust will enter a stun state for a brief moment, making you vulnerable. Additionally, Dust uses a leveling system not unlike those in many RPGs, with experience points being gained by partaking in fights, completing quests, or even just talking to NPCs. The last of which especially can be particularly funny if you're on the verge of leveling up as you enter a conversation, because just as you wrap up the conversation...
Thank you, Dust. Really, you don't know how much this means to me.
But another means of gaining experience points is through the combo meter. See, if you finish a fight with a large enough combo number, you'll get an experience bonus. And the larger the combo number, the more experience you'll get. But if you get hit mid-combo, your combo number will drop back down to 0, and any experience you would have gotten, you won't get. In other words, there's both an incentive and an element of risk and reward with striving to experiment with combos. And trust me, very few things feel as great as getting that combo number up to an exceedingly high number and actually manage to finish the fight with it. Especially if it gives you enough experience to level up. Actually, even leveling up has a bit more to it than just getting upgraded stats, since with each level up, you get to choose which stat your newly acquired skill gem goes into, whether that's health, melee attack damage, defense, or Fidget's magic damage. I usually go with the perfectly balanced approach, but this does allow you to experiment with what kind of advantage you want to have as the game progresses. Heck, if you want to be gutsy, you could do a run where you push your skill gems more so just one specific stat. Though on the topic of RPG systems, there's also equipment in this game, allowing you to upgrade your stats or give yourself benefits, like health regeneration. You can get these items either from Seraph or by having them crafted by Haley via blueprints, requiring you to gather up materials, which are both dropped by defeated enemies and can be bought in the store once the material has been cataloged. You can also buy healing items from Seraph, which can be directly equipped or kept in your inventory, as well as key items like revival stones, which are essentially extra lives, teleport stones, which I'll go into in a moment, or keys that can be used to open up treasure chests full of money, healing items, blueprints, or even enemies sometimes. That's just mean. Keys can also be found throughout the levels, but often will be out of reach until you have later abilities. And up until the latter half of the game, you're often going to find yourself too short on keys to open the chests you find. Not that that's a flaw against the game, more so a minor irritation. Though the RPG elements aren't the only area where Dust takes inspiration from Metroidvanias, it also does so with its level design. Well, to a degree at least. Dust's levels tend to be a fair bit more linear than the average Metroidvania for the most part, and the game also separates its levels into their own, well, levels, as opposed to having one massive, interconnected world like most Metroidvanias tend to, but they still incorporate genre staples, such as paths that require abilities that you unlock later on in the game to get to them. Now fortunately, with the way Dust structures its levels, the backtracking process that usually comes with this feature is quite a bit less tedious. For one, by using teleport stones, you're able to warp back to the level select map from any save point, and on top of that, the game's map system very smartly labels which portions of a level still have key items or treasures that need to be found, making it much easier to figure out what areas you haven't fully completed yet. It does also make it pretty rewarding to go back to a level with more abilities, now able to go down routes or access items that you previously couldn't. The platforming is kept relatively simple, amping up the challenge factor as the game goes on, but you won't be dealing with anything like bottomless pits or insta-kill obstacles. That said, the levels aren't without their fair share of challenges, whether it be spikes, lava, collapsing ground, tumbling rocks, falling icicles, or these bubble plants that shoot out a liquid that'll either heal you or damage you, depending on the color the plant flashes beforehand. Though to be honest actually, I'm not particularly fond of those last two obstacles I listed, as both their placement and the randomness behind if they go off or not can make some parts needlessly frustrating. Occasionally, the game also does incorporate puzzle solving, usually involving these flying bomb fruits and guiding them with your dust storm to a wall that can only be destroyed by them. Some can be as simple as getting the bomb directly to the wall, but some do get a fair bit more creative. A few times the game has you navigate a bomb through a wind-based obstacle course of sorts, and these are quite fun. Or there's this bit where you ride a moving platform upwards and guide the bomb around tons of spikes, as the bomb goes off if it touches a spike. I like this one too. On the flip side though, this one platforming-based bomb puzzle in the Siramung Caverns is a big old nope from me. The entire area is poorly lit, with the bomb serving as your only source of light. And let me just put it this way, platforming around in the dark, especially in an area with spikes, kinda sucks. Why do so many good games keep relying on darkly lit levels? I hate this trope. Actually, while I'm on this tangent, a few things I don't like about this game, there was one level I wanted to point out as a bit of a lower point quality-wise, and anyone who's played this game probably knows what I'm talking about. Chapter 3 is set in the Sorrowing Meadow, which is where the whole demonic spirit stuff I mentioned earlier all happens. And your main mission in this level is to go to 4 different mansions across the estate and find key items in each of them. And you may already see what the problem is here. Remember everything I had said about how backtracking isn't tedious in Dust? This level's the one exception. The path to each mansion tends to be pretty long, and after getting to the mansion, you gotta backtrack your way back to the main area. And you can't even reliably use that teleport stone trick I brought up earlier, because the main area is in the middle of the level, meaning it'll still require a trek to get back to where you need to be. It also doesn't help that the Sorrowing Meadow has the game's 2 most irritating enemies, these exploding zombies that can both do a ton of damage and put a burn status effect on you, as well as these summoners, who litter the entire area with enemies and can only be killed with Fidget's magic. They'll just teleport if you try to hit them with melee attacks. They're pretty quick to take out upon revisits of the level once you're stronger, but the first time you get there, your magic won't be strong enough, so they just take forever to kill. Now that said, aside from that exception, the level progression is quite fair, as in, grinding probably won't be necessary. I played the game on tough difficulty, the second highest difficulty in the game, and I only ended up dying once, coincidentally from an exploding zombie that was created by the summoner. So as long as you don't run from most enemy fights, you should be fine level-wise for the duration of the game. Though on the topic of enemies, my favorite one in the game is these airships you encounter in the final level. Why is that? Well, one of your aerial combos you're able to do ends with a grab attack that sends Dust and the enemy flying to the ground. And this attack works on the airships. I will never get sick of that. Alongside all the stuff I've already brought up, the game does have some other goodies present in the gameplay department. For example, you're able to take up side quests from townsfolk in both Aurora Village and the underground village of Mudpot, some of which will unlock new levels on your map. While many of them tend to be, find this key item in one of the levels, there's still a nice variety of objectives present. Some are heartwarming, such as finding a way to transport Snow to Bopo for a final tribute to his father, or helping this young couple reunite after their girl's village had been destroyed. Some require material gathering, such as helping this fellow build better equipment for the village guards, or helping this old man with some grudges by gathering monster remains, don't ask. And some relate to combat, such as needing to die in a fight to break a curse that was put on you thanks to Fidget, or a personal favorite, getting in a 1000-hit combo. This is where that electricity spell really comes in handy. Just go to town on the zombie enemies when you first enter the Sorrowing Meadow, and you can get it pretty quickly. There's also 2 side quests in particular that really stand out to me. The first is in Aurora Village, where this little girl asks you to look for her brother, and you find out from this pompous rich folk named Gianni that he sent the boy out into monster-infested territory to do his laundry. So you go out and save the boy, but as you go to get the laundry, Fidget notes that there's some nearby poison ivy, and you get the option to put some into the laundry. And across all my playthroughs, I've only ever spared Gianni of this fate once, and it was just to get an achievement. Every other time though, nah, Gianni deserved it, now suffer. The other one is in Mudpot, where this other little girl becomes enamored with Fidget, much to Fidget's discomfort. So Dust decides to get the child a custom-made Fidget doll from Aurora Village's shopkeeper. And the scene that entails is one of my favorites in the whole game.
I gotta say, Dust, I'm feeling a little uneasy about this whole thing.
What's to feel uneasy about, Fidget? You're adorable. I think I might have him make another Fidget doll that I'll just hang on to. Forever.
I don't know you anymore.
Beyond side quests, there are a few other things to do in this game, such as finding all the friends. Hidden throughout the game are guest characters from other indie games, locked away in cages that require multiple keys to unlock, and finding them will grant you a permanent stat bonus. Though even just getting to these cages often requires some extra effort, whether that be using your aerial dust storm on these flying enemies to launch yourself up to where the cage is, or the ones I personally prefer, these secret puzzle rooms themed off of the indie character you're saving. Like for Gomez from Fez, you go through this pixelated multi-room brain teaser, or for Tim from Braid, you go through an area where time only moves when you do, or for the kid from Bastion, where the ground forms as you progress forward. Now some of these do require some obtuse ways to get there, such as crouching in front of this tombstone with a rose before being teleported away, or, in a very bizarre Castlevania 2 reference, crouching while facing this wall until a tornado picks you up to the hidden area. Fortunately though, there are these collectible notes found throughout the game that provide hints on how to find the various friends, so you're not entirely blind in figuring out these processes. And hey, once you found them all, you can hang out with them at this disco party. Yeah. And lastly, there's the Cerulean Trials. Tucked away in a handful of the levels are these extra trial rooms, where you're put on a timed run through increasingly tricky obstacle courses, fighting enemies, and breaking these lanterns to score enough points for higher star rankings. These are really fun ways to test your skills at both quick maneuvering and clearing out enemies as fast as possible, or in the case of the last trial, completing a portal-based logic puzzle. They're tough, but definitely rewarding to go through. Now with all that said, there is one other gameplay aspect I want to talk about, and it's something that I admittedly feel is one of the game's weaker elements. Oh, by the way, we're briefly going into spoiler territory again, just a heads up. That something is the boss fights. Now each of these bosses definitely have some solid build up to them, but the actual payoff for them is underwhelming. Fuse behaves like a regular enemy in how you can interact with him, so it's way too easy to cheese the fight against him. Legit, I beat Fuse in the span of 30 seconds. Lady Tethys isn't quite as easy to cheese as Fuse, but it's a fight that still ends pretty quickly, with her only really threatening attack being this giant claw that you need to either dash by or parry. And Baron King may not behave the same way as Fuse and Tethys, making him harder to cheese, but his attacks are really easy to avoid, turning him into nothing more than a damage sponge. The enemies he summons can honestly be more of a threat than he is. Though despite all that, the General Gaius fight is actually really good. The fight goes the mirroring inabilities route, with Gaius having his own sword combos and even his own magic spells. And with each phase of the fight, the arena changes, allowing for the fight dynamic to shift. The first phase, it's you against him and some troops. The second phase, Moonblood soldiers are on your side, but he also has airships shooting down at you. The third phase, you're in a cavern with bombs. And finally, the battle ends with a one-on-one duel on small platforms above molten lava. This fight's got a lot more going for it than the other bosses, making it a much better battle and a pretty solid final boss as a whole. And despite all that, I'm still not done gushing about this game. There's still two key aspects that I haven't addressed yet to why I love Dust as much as I do, but we'll go over those now. I already mentioned the sound design and voice acting being solid, but I've yet to talk about the absolutely beautiful soundtrack, which, well, yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. Every single song in this OST fits its purpose in the game like a glove, and not a single tune feels like there was less effort put into it than others. Alexander Brandon and Hyperduck Soundworks absolutely gave it their all here, and it shows. From the calm, almost cozy nature of the village themes, to the more ominously atmospheric tunes of areas like the Siramon Caverns or the Sorrowing Meadow, to the intense boss themes. Heck, even the level select theme is absolutely phenomenal. But now there remains one last point I wanted to discuss about this game, and there's a reason I saved it for last. Easily the most notable aspect of Dust as a game, without a doubt, is its visuals. Dean Dodrill took heavy inspiration from animated films of the 80s and 90s with the way Dust looks, particularly that of former Disney animator Don Bluth. Fun fact, there's actually 2 Don Bluth related references in Dust. The An Elysian Tale part of the title was confirmed by Dodrill to be a reference to Bluth's film An American Tale, and there's a line in-game that took me an embarrassingly long time to realize it was a Secret of Nim reference.
I'll bet if you had an army of trained rats, you could loot this place no problem.
Fidgets, I don't think that'd help.
You know, smart mutant rats with magic!
Regardless, Dean Dodrill aimed to create the look and feel of a classic hand-drawn animated film with Dust's visuals. And as an avid lover of animated films myself, with a bit of a personal bias towards the hand-drawn variety, I can confidently say that this game is the most beautiful game I've ever played, followed closely by the Ori games. Dean Dodrill did an absolutely amazing job of capturing the feel he was going for, making the game feel like you're literally playing through a classic animated movie. The environments especially are nothing short of breathtaking, with the Blackmore Mountains being my particular favorite. This level was already my favorite in the game as is, and its gorgeous visual flair is a definite component in that. Seriously, the fact that Dean Dodrill was able to do all this art completely on his own is nothing short of utterly impressive. Oh, who am I kidding? Even beyond the art, I honestly just have the utmost respect for Dean Dodrill as a game developer. Even with its flaws here and there, what he accomplished with Dust was frankly mind-blowing for me. And as someone who in the long term wants to pursue indie development myself, I find his success with this game incredibly inspiring. Actually, to be perfectly honest, sappy as this may come off, Dust was largely why I chose to pursue game development in the first place. I knew about the existence of indie games prior to playing Dust, but even then, this was unlike anything I'd ever played when I first tried it out, and I was blown away by both it and the fact that Dean Dodrill, who again, had zero experience with game design or programming prior, just went for it and was able to pull it off. I had wanted to make games since I was a kid, but playing Dust inadvertently made me want to actually pursue that dream, and well, here I am now, having spent a year studying game design and now nearly a year working at a game studio. And while I wouldn't say this is entirely why I consider Dust my favorite game of all time, I definitely love the game itself, don't get me wrong, I will admit that it having inspired me to follow this childhood dream of mine is a contributing factor. So Dean Dodrill, I doubt you're ever going to see this video, but I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for making this absolutely wonderful game. This has been Black Mage Maverick, and until the next video, have a nice day, everybody.